exacerbate chronic breathing conditions such as asthma or COPD. Those who are susceptible also face an increased risk of infections like bronchitis and bacterial pneumonia. Karen Coker is a public health expert with the University of Florida. She says droughts can also indirectly affect a person's mental health.
The anxiety around navigating your daily life if you already are vulnerable to respiratory health or cardiovascular outcomes.
As drought conditions continue in Central Florida, Coker says good ways to protect your lungs are by wearing a mask outside, buying a HEPA air purifier, which filters small particles, and by washing your hands.
In Northeast Florida, highs in the 80s today.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Eric and Wendy Schmidt through the Schmidt Family Foundation, working toward a healthy, resilient, secure world for all. On the web at theschmidt.org. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, state legislators vote to end Florida's so-called free kill law. St. Johns County officials consider a crackdown on e-bikes. St. Augustine pulls the plug on a piece of roadway artwork. Federal and state agents arrest more than 1,100 immigrants in Florida. And new state rules are unleashed for pets and their owners. To talk about all that and more, I am joined by Frank Powers, veteran newsman and former assignment manager at WJXT News4Jax. Good morning, Frank.
Good morning. Fight on, CPB.
Oh, my goodness. CPB, well, we'll have to talk about that on another headline day, I suppose. Although that is in the headlines, no question. And thanks for the candy, by the way, too. Frank is my regular candy supplier here, keeping me in chocolate. Katie Jeffries, good morning, Jacksonville anchor at First Coast News. Good morning, Katie.
Hey, good morning.
This is not morning for you anymore. This is mid-afternoon.
So I'm going to have my lunch.
That's right. Nikesha Williams, author and producer of the Black and Published podcast. Good morning, Nikesha.
Good morning, Jacksonville.
And St. Johns County reporter Noah Hertz of Jacksonville Today. Good morning, Noah.
Good morning.
All right, I want to talk about a little bit of legislative jujitsu yesterday in Tallahassee with the what's so-called free kill law, whether it was going to be overturned or not. Initially, this appeared like it was kind of dead in the water, and then it reversed. Katie, this is something your station, particularly your colleague Heather Crawford, has done a lot of reporting on, this free kill law. Will you remind us kind of what it provided for, why it became so controversial?
Sure. So the free kill law was put into effect around, I want to say it was around 30 years ago, it was in the 90s. And essentially it says that if you have a loved one that dies of medical negligence, but if that person is over the age of 25, does not have a living spouse, and doesn't have any children under the age of 25, you cannot sue for any non-economic damages. So you can't sue for pain and suffering. I'll use my sister an example because I can. She's 41, unmarried with no children. If something happened to her at the hands of a doctor, no matter how egregious it was, we would not be able to sue. And I think a lot of families who experienced this were, of course, shocked and upset that this was a law. And that's why there's been a movement to repeal this.
Sure. And we've talked about this on the program a couple of times now, Nikesha. This is the kind of thing that people don't realize exists until they sort of are in that situation, some sort of, family circumstance. One thing we heard wasn't, so much a desire to sue for money, but as a desire to know what happened. And very often someone who falls into that category because they're an adult, their medical records aren't open to just anyone. And absent the right to kind of sue or bring a civil claim, family members don't have an opportunity to really find out what happened, to know what went wrong.
Exactly. And so you don't know what to believe, and then you're in a moment of grief. And I'll just use, experiences like being pregnant. And Katie, you might remember this. When you go in the hospital, you sign paperwork before they take you back to triage to give birth, that if anything happens to you, that no one can sue on your behalf for medical malpractice. And that if anything happens, that young child, if that child survives, they have to go into mediation. Like, you have no recourse, right? And so, I've heard the arguments that, oh, this is protecting doctors, and this repealing this bill is going to increase the doctor shortage. But doctors take an oath to do no harm, and what many people find. When they go into these settings and they're in this situation where they lose a loved one, and it's due to medical malpractice, I'm thinking specifically of like the Black maternal health crisis, there is no documentation of all the steps that were taken that did not go right, of what was requested. There's no advocacy. And then now you're left with a lost loved one, a pit of grief, escalating medical bills, and no answers as to what happened to the person who died. And that's just not right. It's not about profits. It's not about insurance premiums. It's even not about the settlements that people would stand to receive if they are able to file these claims, because $1 million is not going to bring someone's life back. But it's about holding people accountable for their actions and making sure that when doctors are practicing, they are doing so with the best intentions of their oath to do no harm.
Frank, this bill nearly, as we said, it stalled. It didn't seem like it was going to pass, although it had a lot of enthusiastic, reception during its committee meetings. Then at the last minute, the sponsor, who's a local senator, Clay Yarborough, said, well, he proposed maybe some caps to bring some more people on board. That sort of seemed to backfire. People didn't want caps.
Well, first they were talking about $1 million cap, and that lost, that amendment. Then they were talking about maybe $500,000, and then he pulled it, and then there was more talk behind closed doors as to what would pass. And finally what emerged was, we just need to do a clean repeal here. I would love to know, back in 1990, when this carve-out was put in there, what was the rationale? Opponents say, well, it's going to, as Nikesha says, it's going to drive doctors out and drive up medical malpractice premiums. It's not like doctors are saying, hey, I'm only treating people who are 26, have no parent or have no spouse or have no kids. So that was specious, to say the least. But it's going away finally.
Assuming the governor
who has a bone to pick with the Republican legislature will sign it. And that's a big question mark.
What are you thinking? I mean, we're going to be talking about a few other legislative issues in this conversation today, but that is a dynamic that could play a role. And yet this bill is so emotionally freighted and, has such a powerful lobby of people who have lost loved ones and have presented this really dramatic advocacy and testimony. It seems that of all the bills, it would be a harder one for the governor to, pick apart for a political reason.
Well, he would have to hang it on some reason. That's for sure. But knowing the governor, he wouldn't have to. He would just do it and say, this is not something that the medical community wants, and he would probably have his Surgeon General out there with him. So I don't know. Right now, I'd say it's 50-50 whether he signs this bill or not.
Wow, that's closer than I would think. Noah, one thing that was about this bill, as we said, a lot of people didn't realize it existed until they were in the circumstance where they were thinking about some sort of legal action, or at least trying to find out more about what happened. But this also applied to tourists, which I think for, a state that relies on tourism, that actually ended up becoming a measure, or at least a reason for some lawmakers to get behind it.
Yeah, it's especially right now with the economy and the shape that it's in and the state of tourism in Florida the way it's in, where a lot of international travelers are really starting to think twice about coming to the United States or Florida specifically. I mean, there was those stories recently about Canadian tourists choosing not to come to Florida because of the tenor of conversation about Canada right now, and then some of the governor's responses to that. The last thing you want is more reasons for tourists to not come to Florida. Like,
Right.
we need everybody to be coming here and spending money, because it's a little tough out here right now.
Right. Well, it is a big victory, I know, for the families that have been working on it, and we've talked to a number of them. So I imagine, assuming it does get signed, it is going to be a big change for them. If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Frank Powers, Katie Jeffries, Nikesha Williams, and Noah Hertz about the week's big headlines. And you can join our conversation by giving us a call at 904-549-2937 or emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. And you can also watch our program live stream now on Facebook or YouTube. I want to move on now to a proposed law, or at least a proposed consideration of a law in St. Johns County. It's growing out of a really terrible tragedy. A middle school student this week was in critical condition after crashing his e-bike in Julington Creek Monday night. Noah, I know that, your area of coverage is St. Johns County. This was not, a story that you focused on particularly, but I imagine it's something you're hearing quite a bit about this poor 12-year-old.
Yeah, and this is something that, the St. Johns County Commission had talked in recent months about wanting to institute some kind of rules about e-bikes. I mean, e-bikes are something that it's not that they came out of nowhere, but their popularity has kind of really spiked in recent years. And you drive through St. Johns County, you drive through parts of those big communities, and you see that I'm thinking like Nocatee and Silverleaf and some of these communities where the sidewalk is really large by default so that it can accommodate golf carts. However, golf carts have a lot more regulations attached to them than something like e-bikes do, because they're in this tricky space of, are they those motorized scooters that you see that can go up to 20, 25 miles per hour, or are they bikes? And so they fall into kind of this tricky area. So some of the rules that the county is going to consider potentially in the next month or two would institute speed limit rules for e-bikes. They would institute rules about where you can ride them, and if you're going to ride them in certain areas like city parks or multi-use trails, that you keep it to a speed limit that is, under a certain level. It's a tricky case. I know I talk to a lot of bike advocates in St. Augustine because I am a cyclist, and it's something that's like near and dear to my heart. And most people who bicycle to go to work, to school, any kind of regularity, will avoid the sidewalks if they can. But it's this tricky situation of, I personally don't think bikes really belong on the sidewalks because a bike can really hurt a pedestrian. But if there is no bike lane and the speed limit is 50, like, what are you supposed to do? You have to move over to the sidewalk or you risk getting killed. And so it's really tricky. It's really tricky for bikes and pedestrians.
Nikesha, I know that I see kids in my neighborhood whipping around on these e-bikes very often at night, very often without any lighting at all, never with a helmet. And, I about a week ago said to my husband, I was like, it looks like a ton of fun, and I can see this being so dangerous. And, then this terrible accident. So there were a lot of people in St. Johns County saying, it is a awful thing that happened and not a surprise.
Technology is often faster than regulation, as we've seen with any invention over the last 30 years, including the internet, right? And so if you think about the pace of invention, it always takes a tragedy, unfortunately, for people to realize, oh, maybe we should regulate that new thing that everybody thinks is so cool and so fun. And so e-bikes do seem like a lot of fun, but they are in a very gray area of, are they a more motorized vehicle like a scooter, or even like a scooter or a golf cart, or is it just a bike, and where should they be? And so I think neighbors are going to have to come together. I think city and county lawmakers are going to have to come together and really think about what are the regulations that we can put in place to make sure that children are safe, pedestrians are safe, and then drivers are safe, because we don't want to have these run-ins that end in tragedy, and that is exactly what this is.
Katie, I don't know that we have any information or updated information on this kid's condition. I know that as of Tuesday, he was in critical condition. And, I don't know that we have much more information than that. Have you heard any more?
We actually spoke with his
Okay.
father last night in
Okay.
the hospital. Our Sydney Deshawn was able to get in contact with him. He said he is awake. He was able to sit up. He hugged one of his nurses, and he spoke a few words to his father. So that's obviously a good sign,
Sure.
considering he's been unconscious for 2 days.
Wow.
But his dad, when we talked to him, said, as a parent, your heart drops, because he had just gotten home from the grocery store. He saw his son was calling his phone. When he answers the phone, it's a police officer saying that there's been, his son's been in a terrible accident. And I'm like, as a parent, I can't fathom how hard that is to get that call. But it seems like he is at least in the recovery process, since he is awake, alert, and moving around a little bit at this point.
The number of accidents, Frank, has skyrocketed. I was, looking into it, and, the last year where this information, where, this kind of data was available, you're seeing thousands and thousands of injuries, hospitalizations as a result of e-bike related accidents. And yet it's still just a fraction of what we see with regular bicycles, in terms of the number of injuries, about 23,000 e-bike related injuries compared to 400,000 bicycle injuries.
Because they're younger kids doing it. I saw the report on First Coast News last night. and it was very emotional. Credit to your coworker there. The father said it all. He wasn't wearing a helmet. Parents, you got to make your kids wear helmets. I'm sure that'll be part of the legislation to come in St. Johns County. But you buy your kid one of these things, you got to tell them. You got to police yourself. If they put on tickets out there, I just don't see this scenario that happened on a racetrack road. Say a deputy's going by one direction, he's looking at traffic, he sees a kid flying by the other direction, going too fast in a helmet. What's he going to do? Blue light him? It's got to be the parents.
Well, I mean, one of the things that they're talking about, Noah, is, making sure that they're, following the laws that are in place for bicycles. Kids, are required, if they're under 16, to be wearing a helmet, no matter what they're on.
Yeah. And bikes are required to, stop at stop signs, stop at stop lights, yield to pedestrians. They don't always do that. It's not.
Don't get me going.
I would say that it is not 100% the norm that bicyclists follow all the rules that cars do, but that is what they're supposed to do. And you can be held responsible for not doing those things. Whereas, like Nikesha was saying, it's been kind of strange with no regulations on the books for e-bikes. If an e-bike blows through a stop sign, it's like, well, who was that stop sign really intended for? Are they a pedestrian? Are they a motor vehicle? Are they a bike? So this legislation, when it comes before St. Johns County, might tighten up some of those questions.
They're looking, Nikesha, at this ordinance that was adopted in American Beach recently governing e-bikes. And what I thought was interesting was that ordinance grew a lot out of the community concern about these things riding through so quickly and hitting pedestrians or getting in the way of vehicles. It was sort of less, it certainly was grounded somewhat in the rider safety issue, but it was almost like these things are taking over our neighborhoods and posing a safety threat to pedestrians and motorists, as they're, kind of why they decided to get into it.
And it really does, because if you're just going for a walk and someone else is on an e-bike, they're trying to make sure that you get out of the way. Who has the right of way there, right? And if they're children, we're talking about going to have to teach children the rules of the road at like 10, because once your kids are of a certain age and you get them this e-bike, they're outside. And as parents, you're not outside with them. You're not making sure that they have a helmet on. You just know it's summertime, they're outside, get out of my face. So it's about having the right of way. It's about understanding the rules of the road. It's about having regulation. As Frank said, parents are going to have to enforce it, because we don't want police to be having to blue light or write civil citations or even have run-ins with kids who are just outside trying to have fun and then making a carceral type of thing. So it's going to have to be regulated quickly, but within reason, so that parents are instilling in their children what the rules are, what they need to do, and then if they can't follow them, then there needs to be punishment parentally before it becomes punishment by the state or by the city.
Yeah. And we do know that there'll be a public comment period if the county does decide to take this up before anything happens. We are talking about the week's big headlines. And if you'd like to join our conversation, you are welcome to call 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. I want to move on now to a topic that's been getting a lot of heat and light in St. Augustine right now. Noah, this is something that you've been covering and following. It's a piece of public art that was proposed for a roundabout. Catch us up on what it is that's going on down there.
Yeah, so this actually started about a year ago. I was looking back trying to find the first story I wrote about it, and it was actually one of the handful of first stories I wrote when I started here at Jax today. So that was kind of fun. Back last March, the city of St. Augustine put out a call for artists because they really wanted to put some piece of public art in the tricky intersection that is at the intersection of, San Carlos and May Street and San Marco in downtown St. Augustine. So the big intersection you go through if you're going north out of downtown St. Augustine, it's locals call it the Peanut. You end up there if you're heading to Volano. It's a very strange intersection.
Yeah.
Yes, people
and kind
call
of where
it
the carousel,
Right.
that
Yes.
area,
Yes.
right, used to be.
People call it a roundabout, but it is not really a roundabout because it has signals and stop signs, and so it's a really weird intersection. But either way, they put out this call for artists. The city said, look, well, we have up to $250,000 to give to you, to an artist, to do this. It went through this period where a citizen board that included some artists on it got to look at the proposed pieces of art. They selected one. It went to the city commission. The city selected it. Bing, bang, boom. By last April, it was all sorted out. So it was kind of funny to me to see this come back because I've seen some people call it controversial. I think I even called it controversial in the story I wrote, but it wasn't really much of a controversy at the time. This kind of built on social media of people sharing images of the proposed piece of art, which was by a sculpture artist out of North Carolina. His name is Ivan DePena. And it was called Groundswell, and it was this dome-shaped piece of art that had all kinds of ridged and I don't even know what you call that, just like different textured pieces of concrete. Since it was domed, I saw people calling it like a hobbit hole or something like that. And a couple of concerns that built out on social media pretty quickly were, one, that $250,000 was way too much to spend on a piece of public art. Granted, people who felt the other way pointed out that a sculpture is meant to last in perpetuity. Like, this is a piece of art that would last for a very, very long time. People were concerned that it would just become used by unhoused people who were just looking for shade and shelter. And a lot of people just said it was ugly. They just said they didn't like it. So it came back to the city commission just this past week. They talked in depth about how, since they approved this a year ago, the process was well under its way. They had already spent almost $90,000 with the artist in the design stage and that kind of thing. And one of the city commissioners just said, I want to drop it. I want to reverse course. Let's find a new way to spend this money and move on. And there was some disagreement on the city commission about this, but they ended up approving just ditching the thing entirely. They've spent $90,000 that now that artist just gets it and gets to walk away, and they have $160,000 now that's uncommitted that they just get to figure out what to do with that now.
Yikes, Frank. I mean, $90,000 is a lot to just sort of wave goodbye to in a city like St. Augustine.
But it happens, doesn't it? The city council down there doesn't seem to know what it wants to do with that traffic circle, is what we used to call them. It's forever congested. They got rid of the carousel. What happened to the plans to bring back a carousel? They wanted to put in a gigantic gas station convenience store there with multiple pumps. Are you kidding me? Who came up with that idea? Whatever they're going to do, just do it. Let's see some decisiveness.
Yeah. Well, this was a controversy initially, Katie, in part because they didn't select a local artist. And obviously, it's a very artsy city. There's a lot of local artists and some very accomplished sculptors. But they chose somebody from out of town. And I know that early on social media, that was also a great source of contention.
Yeah, I mean, you probably could have won a lot of favor had you picked a local artist, because then that is, money going back into the community in a sense. That's someone from here. And we do have great artists. So if they really wanted to move the project, that probably should have been maybe one of the considerations, is to go with someone local.
Yeah. I want to take a call from Mike in St. Johns County. Good morning, Mike. Go ahead.
Hi, how you doing?
Terrific.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, my comment is on the e-bikes. I think you all are missing the point. I listened to your discussion. The people on those bikes are children, and those bikes accelerate very quickly. It's misleading to even call them a bike. They accelerate very quickly, and they seem to stay at that same level. They get all over the sidewalks. They're a threat to older folks. I've seen it many times. And I don't know why they're selling them to anyone, say, under the age of 14 or so. These are children riding these things that are dangerous. I'm really amazed that they even sell them to them. And if they do, they almost need to be licensed.
Thank you, Mike. There are, as you were saying, Noah, there's kind of different gradations of these bikes, and some of them are pedal. They only work with the pedals activated. And very often those are the ones that are kind of considered designed for children. They only go up to 20 miles per hour, and you kind of have to be pedaling.
Yeah, I have a few friends who have e-bikes, and there is, like you said, there's different gradations. I know people who have e-bikes and barely use the motorized function on it, just to they do it if they're going up a hill, just to kind of juice up a little extra power. And
then where are they riding?
Not in Jacksonville.
Okay.
And then you have the ones that maybe it's fun to kick the pedal to the metal and get it going a little fast. And those are the ones that are, primarily targeted at commuters, people who need something a little quicker. But I off the top of my head, do not know what the regulations are as far as age to purchase these things. But yeah, it's definitely gradations of how dangerous those things can be.
Sure. We also have an email from Kelly saying one-wheeled riders need clarity on their responsibility. I guess that means two-wheel, but kind of bicycle riders
Unicyclists,
need
yeah.
clarity on their responsibilities and regulations. It's very dangerous for both the rider and the people around them. I just wanted
St.
to.
Johns County went through this years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago. It was over golf carts. And why did they do that? Because there were a number of very high-profile crashes in which
With
kids
kids.
landed on their head and were in a hospital. I remember one teenage gal, she was in a coma for months, finally came out of it, but she's got, life-changing TBI after that. And that's, as Nikesha says, it takes a tragedy before somebody says, oh, I guess we have to do something about this.
Yeah, my producer or director is saying that one wheels are a thing. I don't know. Are you talking about unicycles?
Oh,
The Segway type things.
yeah.
Oh,
the-
sure.
Yeah.
Those.
Yeah,
Okay.
whatever
yeah.
they're called. I see those too.
Okay. I mean, the Segways I know actually do have a couple wheels, but maybe you're talking about the ones that are like a scooter.
It's like a
you
it's like a
stand up.
hoverboard type thing.
Yep,
You
yep.
Right.
you balance on it. It looks like a
Hoverboards still have
skateboard.
2 wheels.
Yeah,
True.
there is one I think that maybe
I'm
I don't
thinking
know.
of the ones that has one wheel in the middle and it looks like a skateboard,
Skateboard.
but you
Mhm.
balance on it.
Right.
And yeah,
Is that-
Okay.
yeah,
Sure.
they
Okay.
look dangerous as all get out. I won't get on one of those.
Sure, we're forgetting about those. And in fact, we were talking about two-wheeled scooters, and some of them can actually go if their like sort of limiter is taken off. They can go up to 40 miles an hour, and I mean that's a terrifying thought too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you get thrown from that, I mean, it could be fatal.
Yeah. All right. I want to move on now to a topic of enforcement in Florida. We know that there was recently a major crackdown. It was called Operation Tidal Wave, and it took into custody an estimated 1,100 people, undocumented immigrants, primarily or perhaps exclusively. I think we don't know all of that information yet. But this is an example, Nikesha, of Florida really leading when it comes to this enforcement and this partnership between local law enforcement and federal agents.
It is an example of Florida leading in this area. And another reason, as Noah stated earlier, that Florida is seeing a reduction in tourism and a reduction in people visiting because Florida has become a very scary place to live if you are not a certain shade or phenotype. In a year or so ago, when the NAACP issued a travel warning to Florida, people thought that they were being outrageous and they were taking things too seriously about the things that were happening in the legislature. But now we are seeing raids across the state that are enforced with the full power of the federal government. The local law enforcement officers are cooperating. They're going into schools and they're snatching people. And as we have seen, we don't always know that everyone who is targeted is undocumented. We don't always know that everyone who is targeted is a migrant who has come illegally or or whether they have not requested asylum or have not gone through the correct channels to remain in the country. People are being snatched. That's called human trafficking and that's called kidnapping. And unfortunately, the United States has a track record of that, but they don't want you to talk about that either. So Florida has become a very hostile state to live in if you are not a citizen. And while we're on the subject, since I brought it up, birthright citizenship is at risk. So who is able to stay? Who is able to live? Who is able to make a living? And people are being snatched and their loved ones don't know. There's no due process. And this is what people say they wanted or what they voted for. But honestly, it reminds me of a scene from a Colson Whitehead novel, The Underground Railroad, where he talked about slavery, talking about there were certain states that just banned Black people being in the state. Florida is trying to do that. The city of Jacksonville is trying to do that by banning undocumented people from even entering the city of Jacksonville. That is now a crime. And now that's going higher to the state level from banning them from entering the state. Where are people supposed to go when they're seeking asylum and they're running from crime or from famine or from climate change disaster? Where are they supposed to go?
Frank, this was kind of putting the state's attorney general in conflict as well with a federal judge in matters of enforcement. And it is sort of an echo of what we're seeing at the federal level in terms of this tension between a judge's order. In this case, a federal judge had halted enforcement of the state's new immigration law.
Right.
Basically, these agreements that local law enforcement have been signing up for to participate and to sort of be proactive in enforcing immigration law.
Signing up and participating, from what I found, are two different things.
Okay.
All right, they are signing up, but for example, here in Jacksonville, I talked to JSO about this. They said we were called once. to back up a federal agent, and these can be FBI, DEA, ATF. They're all being, I don't want to use the word conscripted, but I think the word was deputized to assist ICE in these roundups. Now, this first one, tidal wave, was mostly in South Florida, in the Tampa and Miami areas. So far, they haven't put any numbers on. There's a website that ICE has, and they've been documenting monthly 287G encounters. That's what they call them. And through the first 3 months of the year in Northeast Florida, guess how many they've had? One.
Mm-hmm.
That was in mid-March. Nothing. I keep checking this because sooner or later the April numbers will come on. Of course, they'll be a lot higher because of what we know. But it's ICE. It's doing so because the new border czar has made it clear loudly in multiple news outlets that he doesn't think enough roundups have been taking place, and this is a direct response to that.
No, this judge in this enforcement order, though, had said, basically the state law telling local law enforcement agencies that they need to enforce federal law. She didn't think that it maybe passed muster. She put a temporary restraining order on it. And initially, Florida's attorney general said, we're going to follow that order. He issued, an order to local law enforcement agents saying, to follow her order, and then followed that up with a letter a few days later saying that they did not need to follow her order. We talked to attorney and government expert Chris Hand last week about this tension between some leaders and the courts. Let's just listen to what he had to say about that.
A court order has the force of law, and we've begun to see a little pushback on that at the federal level and maybe in some ways at the state level as well. But I just did want to make clear to our listeners that court orders are not suggestions. They're not recommendations. They're not, here's some best practices or good ideas. They're the force of law, and government has to abide by those. They can appeal them. If they don't agree with them, they can appeal them. There's a process they can go through to challenge those orders, but they can't just simply refuse to follow them. They're the law.
And so you have that statement, Chris Hand, who certainly knows his stuff. And then you have our attorney general, who's basically telling law enforcement agencies that they did not need to follow this judge's order.
I mean, I think it's another case of the Florida government and the DeSantis administration kind of further lining itself up with the federal government's tactics. I mean, like Nikesha, to your point about whether people truly voted for this, I think for some folks who are very much in favor of President Trump, one thing they really like about him and his governance style is that it is a move fast and break things style of governance. It is an act first and ask questions later. It is an easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission.
It is an authoritarian style of government, and this administration in the state of Florida, led by Ron DeSantis, is following in the footsteps of the federal administration, which is outright flouting the federal law. Mm-hmm. They are quoting Andrew Jackson and saying the Chief Justice made his ruling, now let him enforce it. They are laughing in the face of the justice system. They are laughing in the face of the foundation of this country that was founded on 3 branches of government: the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. Those checks and balances have fallen to pieces, and no one cares. And so now we see in the state of Florida, our governor doing the exact same thing, because if the president can do it for the country, then why can't Ron DeSantis do it for the state of Florida?
We've got a call from Michelle in St. John's on this topic. Good morning, Michelle. Go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So it has gotten very scary in certain parts of Jacksonville and the state. At University of North Florida, along with 10 other universities, possibly now all of the 13 state universities have signed, the police departments have signed agreements with ICE. Faculty and staff are being told to carry our passports or birth certificates with us. And if we are stopped, to give them whoever stops us to not be confrontational with them, but to give them a card, which essentially states that I don't have to talk to you. I know my 4th and 5th Amendment rights. And then to report the incident to the university and the general counsel's office. But being of the religion that I am, and being not having many friends, and UNF is a very multicultural university, it is very scary to know that ICE, who can show up in plain clothes, can come up to you or a group of people and say, "Give me all your IDs." It's very authoritarian and borderline fascist, in my opinion. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate your call. We also have a call from John in St. Augustine. Good morning, John. Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say that it's refreshing to have a state like Florida that leads the nation in doing the right thing. It's illegal to come into the country between border checkpoints. That's why we call them illegal immigrants. So to have a state that help our federal government to enforce our immigration laws, that's a great thing. Hopefully it will get other states confidence to do the same. And I kind of look at it just the same way with COVID. Florida led along with Georgia in opening up early. And what we now know is entirely the right thing to do. In fact, we probably could have done it a lot earlier. But, without efforts from states like Florida that look around and say, you know what, we made these laws for a reason, let's enforce them. Other states tend to leave it to the federal government, which, depending on who's in charge, might just choose to not enforce the law at all. So, and to the comment that, if people who are illegal immigrants are afraid to come into Florida because we're enforcing the law, that's just fine. They can go to California, they can go to Minnesota, they can go to New York, no problem.
Thanks, John. Frank, one of the things that has come up kind of again and again is, whether the people that are being, gathered or arrested or detained are being afforded due process. And I know there's been some recent reporting, including by the New York Times, that some of the folks that were deported to El Salvador, there was actually a couple of women initially that were sent with this group. And
error, they call it administrative error.
Sure.
And we don't know these 1,100 people who were picked up. We don't know who they are. We don't know what their status was. How were they illegal? Did they, come in between checkpoints? Did they have visas here or work permits that expired? I mean, some have deportation orders and they just fell through the cracks. The previous administration just let it go. This administration is going hard to the wall against that. We just don't know the status of the people who were picked up, and that's what we're waiting for on this ICE website. It'll come out sooner or later, but that will answer a lot of questions as to who were picked up. I saw one on Action News was talking to the lawyer from one of them who was picked up. They didn't say who it was or where it was, just that she said all the same things, that this guy was here. There was no issue with him being here, but he picked up and we're getting no answers.
But the lack of transparency is one of those things, Katie, or at least concurrent transparency. I mean, to Frank's point, at some point we will probably find out, the details of who these people were. But, as we start to find out details of the folks that have already been deported, it's clear some of them didn't have a criminal record of any kind. And again, some of them were women sent to a men's, maximum security facility. So the vetting and the transparency has been one of the areas of concern.
Correct. And I mean, that's part of the point of due process, that they have to prove you are who they say you are and that you did what they say you did. I mean, with these names, when they come out, how do you know you picked up the correct person you were even looking for? They've said that there are criminal records, but until names are released, how do people independently verify that? So again, as you were saying, transparency is important to understand who was picked up and the reasons the government are giving, and to double check that that information is correct.
Got a call from Ed in Orange Park. Good morning, Ed. Go ahead.
Good morning. It's funny because Obama and Biden deported millions of people, and they were not given the judicial rights that American citizens have. They did not have a right to, which is to go to court, get arrested, get the court outcome. Who knows how long that's going to take? Then you have the right to appeal. Lawyers will be provided by the taxpayers, which is what we as American citizens or legal immigrants here have the right to do. Obama and Biden didn't do that to all the millions they deported. And the practicality part of it is that to do that for all the 10 to 20 million illegals here would cost tens of billions of dollars to the taxpayers, and would take years if we were able to deport anybody. The next thing is about mistakes being made, arresting or people who should not be arrested. That is true. That's why we have the courts and lawsuits to take care of that process. Police make mistakes all the time. or occasionally anyway, that doesn't mean we stop arresting people or enforcing the law. Doctors make mistakes. One way to stop doctors from making mistakes is not to have any doctors. Don't have any. That way they cannot get sued for making a mistake. So reality has to set in here somewhere, I think. And I thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your call, Ed. I appreciate it. We also have a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Good morning. I think the biggest thing we have to, retrain ourselves, and I think I heard this earlier this week. These are not deportations. These people did not have any due process rights, and they weren't deported back to the country of origin. This was an extrajudicial extraction to a third-party company, to a prison where they routinely beat and starve prisoners. Okay, so these aren't deportations. And as the situation happened earlier this week where the subdivision of ICE went into a family's home in Oklahoma, they were American citizens. They tore up their house, they stole their money. So at this point, I'm not willing to give my government the leeway to say what they would do. Because right now we're in the middle of a power struggle between authoritarianism and every other part of government, and we're laying down. Understand that everybody's scared. Law-abiding people like me are scared. What that woman went to UNF, which I went to, so that now means when I go to a function, I need to carry my passport and birth certificate like I'm in South Africa apartheid. Give me a break, people. Let's not roll down and accept the government's version, because they've been lying to us all these 90 days. They've gotten people out of the country. We don't know who they are. They haven't been deported because they weren't sent back to Venezuela.
Right.
They were sent to El Salvador. Yes, right now. So,
And it may get worse. There was a report just this morning that the Trump administration is considering using enemy combatant status for illegal immigrants, which would mean you get even less than you're getting now in terms of due process.
This is not how our government was supposed to work. This is racial profiling. Let's call a thing a thing. We are looking at all the brown people. We're looking at their last names. We're looking at their tattoos. We're looking at their clothing. And we're saying, oh, they must be a criminal. Oh, they must be a gang member. Oh, they have a Latinx last name. Let's round them up and let's deport them, regardless of what their status is. Do you even know that they're undocumented? These are not administrative errors because you are not taking the time out to check in the rolls, whether or not they have an asylum hearing, whether or not they're a green card holder. You don't care. You don't care. You are rounding up brown people who you don't want to be here and are doing an ethnic cleansing and sending those people to another country. It is not a deportation. It is kidnapping and human trafficking, which the United States is rooted in. Let's call a thing a thing. People did vote for this. I wasn't among them, but people did vote for this. This is ethnic cleansing. This is authoritarianism. This is fascism. Let's call it what it is. It's not leaning toward it. They're doing exactly what they said and then wanting to offer asylum to white South Africans who ran South Africa for the low price of $5,000 to come onto the United States. We see what they are doing. They are establishing this white supremacy once again throughout government, masked in Christian nationalism and evangelicalism, and trying to make everyone so fearful of going outside that they just kowtow and bow down to this government. Let them run roughshod through our Constitution, and if they don't like it here, then leave. The very real conversations about expatriation or self-deportation are happening, and that is the goal.
I think to the point the one caller made, too, about the former presidents, specifically Democratic presidents, choosing to deport lots and lots of people as well is very true. Like, I don't think anybody in their right mind is denying the fact that President Obama and President Biden deported a lot of people.
And Obama was known as the deporter in chief.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think it is important to keep in mind differences between, like you said, Katie, deporting people back to their home country, their country of origin, and deporting people to a third-party state because we are sometimes erroneously labeling a lot of people as gang members and then only finding out after the fact in these administrative errors that they might not have actually been.
Well, it's a great conversation. I appreciate all your voices. Thanks so much for doing this morning. Frank Powers, Katie Jeffries, Nikesha Williams, Noah Hertz. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, blending elements of soul and R&B with gospel roots. We're going to talk to rapper Cale James ahead of his performance tonight at the WJCT soundstage.
AEG presents Hauser, The Rebel is Back tour. The Croatian cellist brings his blend of classical, pop, and rock music to the St. Augustine Amphitheater on Sunday, May 18th at 8 p.m. Information at theamp.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. One text or call can wreck it all. Learn more through distracted driving presentations for teens and the workforce. Arrive alive. Let's end distracted driving.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com. DuPont Counseling Group is a team of therapists, psychiatrists, and counselors available to help with life's mental health challenges. Everyone needs help sometimes. More information can be found at jacksonvillecounseling.org.
What happens to the brain during a concussion? I'm Dr. Joe Servin. Join me tomorrow at 4 for What's Health Got to Do with It, only in WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville.
On the next Florida Roundup, cap and gown season. The college class of 2025 is entering a difficult job market with lower hiring in the federal workforce and a crowded private sector. Are you a senior in college looking to start your career? What are your plans? Email us, radio@thefloridaroundup.org. How about parents and grandparents? What's ahead for your college graduate? Email us, radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Then join us Friday noon until 1.
The president says one thing.
We've just gotten started. You haven't even seen anything yet. It's all just kicking in.
His critics warn the economy is saying something else.
Donald Trump is running America the same way he ran his businesses, into the ground.
Join us as we catch up on another very busy week on the Friday News Roundup. Next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
They counted me out and I'm leading again. I'm back up and ready to win. They counted me out and I'm leading again.
Welcome back. From performing in downtown rap ciphers to festival stages, rapper Kale James is a hallmark of the downtown hip-hop scene. He performs tonight at the WJCT soundstage. He's the latest installment of the Jacksonville Music Experience sound series, and he joins me now. Good morning, Kale.
Good morning. Good morning.
It's great to have you. We just were listening there to Ready to Win, which is from your 2024 album, It's Personal. It was named one of JME's best local songs of 2024, and it's great. Tell us a little bit about your style. Do you define, particularly as a Southern rapper, do you define in any way as kind of like having a voice of like the Jacksonville sound?
Yeah. So I think I'm a Southern rapper. I think rap is really what I try to make all of my songs. Just the basis of it is rapping. That's just because that's what inspired me the most as an artist. So I think all of it is really soulful at times. Just because that's how I just grew up. I just grew up in church and choir and things like that. So everything is really Southern. But I also try to make sure that it's consumable for all audiences. Yeah.
Yeah, and you do have an incredible singing voice.
Oh, thank you.
And it is present in your songs.
Yeah,
You know, it
yeah.
is you rap, but you also do a lot of singing, and it
Yeah.
is really soulful. And so, how do you kind of balance those two things?
Yeah. So a lot of times I kind of start off. It might start off as me just singing. In all honesty, a lot of that is just kind of like the choruses. On the chorus, I start singing, and then from there, okay, I always want to make sure that I'm rapping, and so the verse is always really heavy rapping, lyrical. I think like in with all the melodies that I do throughout the song, I try to layer it as well. So I kind of just try to give you like different feels of it throughout each record. Yeah.
And the pieces are also really, kind of highly produced. There's like other elements that
Yeah.
you bring in, sound bites and stuff. Do you do a lot of that yourself?
No, so I get producers around town, so like Mecca the Marvelous, Dev Gerard, Freddie Bricks, and then I have an engineer, Phil Green, at Green Team Media, and we just kind of mix everything that way, and then it's a long process. Like the last project took like a year, so
Wow.
like an entire year for us to make. So it's a long process. Yeah.
And I mentioned that you kind of have your roots in the art walk, rap ciphers. For those that aren't familiar or haven't kind of participated, describe a little bit about, what that scene is, how you participate, and then just how did it influence you as an artist?
Yeah, so I can set the scene up for you. So you're downtown, just imagine just outside, and then there's guys in a circle or just people in a circle that are rapping, and everybody just comes around and just kind of gets entertained by these freestyles that are off the top of your head, and there's an instrumental playing, and you just grab the mic, and when the next person's done, it's your turn. And for me, that's how I got introduced to rapping, even as a young kid, just freestyles that I would see on videos on YouTube and stuff like that. And so when I came here and I got here, it was like 2018 or something like that. And I went to Art Walk and I saw these guys rapping. And it was Maul Jones at the
Maul
Lyricist
Jones.
Live. Yeah. And I just, ever since then, like, I just been my guy. Like, he's like a big brother to me, honestly, at this point. And so, like, I've just been always just attached to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and Lyricist Live has been kind of a
Yeah,
foundation.
he's been doing it for like 13 years or something like that now. Yeah, so yeah, it's real cool. No violence, just everybody's just rapping and just constant cycles of people just giving out verses. Yeah,
And it's competitive but collegial too.
yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, it's definitely camaraderie is there, but I'm always like I'm trying to be the best. So yeah.
You have a new single titled
Mhm.
"The Chase." It was released in earlier last month, in
Yeah.
early April.
Yeah.
I want you to tell us about it, but let's take a listen to it first.
Avoid shaking it up, cause I don't know what I'ma say when this is all for the cuss. My people talking about stories, how they ran from the clan. Never thought they'd lose their life to the hands of a man. They gotta wait, never waste a second chance. If a cone head cross my path, never run again. I'm just saying the old days coming back, so we gotta defend. If it's your homies or your kin, spin the block for their protection. Life a marathon, so I'ma keep on running.
So, real serious subject that
Yeah,
we're talking
for
about
sure.
there.
Yeah.
But, again, told in this beautiful, poetic
Mhm.
way. What inspired you to write that?
So I went through a transition of just kind of becoming Kel James all over again, really. And so I think when I was writing the songs, I was kind of deciding on what journey I was going on for my career as an artist, really. And so I always found myself just running towards the next thing, like what is it that I'm reaching for? And I realized that every time I would get to the goal, I would never celebrate the goal. I would just celebrate me continuing the process. And so when I wrote this song, it kind of was just like that, keep on, keep running, keep running, keep running. Just because like I had to keep going. And so for me, all of those things that I feel like are important to me on the journey, I put it in the song. And so different I touch on different topics, but they're all things that I feel like are things that could kind of cause you to second guess yourself or second guess whatever it is that you're trying to like pursue.
And you talk about kind of reinventing Kale James. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
people know you as Kale that raps.
Yeah.
Why the name change?
So it started off as a joke, really. So some of my music homies, I'll be singing somewhere, like I'll be in the studio just singing, and they're like, "Oh, that's Kale James," and they didn't even know that like that's my name. Like they didn't even know that like the whole time that was my actual name. And then so the more and more I started like really get personal, not to have no puns, but really get personal. Even with the last project, I made this personal, and then like afterwards. I just kind of felt like a space was missing for me to like kind of like really, really like introduce myself more and more. So I think with that, I decided to have a name change. Yeah.
Well, it is a great album, and we'll hear a lot of it tonight. It is the Jax Music Experience
Yep.
stage at the WJCT Soundstage. Doors are tonight at 6. Kale James takes the stage at 8. It's such a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
for
you
being
so
on.
much.
Really
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it.
I hope to see you there.
All right. Please join us Monday. We're going to be talking about allegations of jail mistreatment after a woman leaves police custody with a badly bruised face. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. ServPro, independently owned and operated. Whether it's water, mold, or fire damage, they'll help you restore your home or business. ServPro is available 24/7. ServPro, helping to make it like it never even happened.